Hi, everybody. It's Bob Ost. It's Friday. Oh, Lord, what is it? It's February 17th. Um, and welcome to TRU. Welcome to the TRU Commuity Gathering. For those of you out there who don't know who we are, we're an arts service organization that's dedicated to helping people understand and navigate the business of theater. We have a particular interest in developing and nurturing producers, but we also have a lot of writers and we have a lot of directors in our organization and our community. So we try to serve everybody. So here we are in virtual world. Some of you are podcast viewers and some of you are on YouTube. So welcome to TRU. If you want to actually be part of the conversations and be in the room with us, email me. It's real easy. Just email me, trunltd@aol.com. That's trunltd@aol.com. And put Zoom in the headline and do something clever with it. And then I'll send you a link every week and you can come and be part of these conversations. We started off doing this as a response to COVID. Everybody remember COVID? Can anybody forget COVID? So we're ostensibly out of shutdown and we're out of the masked world. But to be honest with you, I know just as many people are coming down with COVID now as I did 2 years ago. It's still with us, everyone. So be careful, be cautious, be smart. So conversation started off with, oh my God, what is shutdown? Why am I in quarantine? And how do I deal with it? How do I make art while I'm alone? How do I get my work out there with no possibility of being produced on stage? So we learned a lot about virtual. We learned about Zoom. I learned about Zoom. Here I am learning about Zoom. And we found different ways of expressing ourselves and found different ways of creating art through Zoom. We couldn't do live, so we turned to Zoom, and some people were okay with it and some people were miserable about it. And there's still an ongoing conversation about the value of doing things filmed on Zoom as opposed to live in person. And that kind of spins around in an interesting way to today's topic, which is basically the difference. We're going to actually be talking about the difference between live performance and film performance. I have David Armstrong here, and he's going to be talking to us. He knows more than anybody I know about musical theater. He's saying no, but yes, you do. And he's going to be talking about how we translate between the two medium. Right now, I think that hybrid is with us. So as you all know, we're doing a play reading series, and I encourage hybrid presentations of theater pieces on Zoom. We're going to take a look at something a little bit more expensive, which is basically taking a Broadway musical, which is a little expensive on just to begin with, and making it into a movie musical. And we're going to talk about the differences between the two. I'd like this to be, it's a fun conversation. Anybody who loves musicals should enjoy this, I hope. And I love musicals. I'm passionate about it. It's one of my main passions. So hopefully some interesting insights will come out of this that will guide everybody in terms of how you think about your show on stage versus how you think about it if it's going to be made into a musical. I'm chatting enough. I'm going to bring David in. He's going to make me shut up. David, turn on your mic and come on in.
I would never make you shut up, Bob.
Oh, people have tried. Believe me. I've got an assistant who prides himself on being able to make me shut up. So welcome, David. Tell us a little bit about who you are, about your background. You've got a very impressive background, and right now you have it's a podcast, isn't it?
The podcast, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I've been around a long time now. I probably am best known for the 18 years I was the artistic director of the Fifth Avenue Theater in Seattle, which was the dream job of a lifetime. I was there from 2000 to almost 2019. And during that time, we did a lot of course, it's a big theater company. We did major Broadway scale musicals, both revivals and a lot of new work. We did 21 new musicals during my time there, and they haven't stopped. They keep going. They're continuing with that tradition as part of the mix of programming there. And
just anecdotally, can you just tell us some of the musicals that were under your auspices that have gone on to?
Sure. 9 of those 21 musicals went on to Broadway.
Yeah.
Beginning with Hairspray, the Wedding Singer, Aladdin, Disney's Aladdin, First Date. Of course, I always start to name them and I can't think of them all. Christmas Story, the musical version of A Christmas Story, which we did world premieres of most of those. Memphis, which also won the Tony Award. So 2 of the shows that we did won the Tony Award, Hairspray and Memphis.
It's pretty impressive, Guy. It's pretty impressive.
It's ridiculous. I would never have predicted that would happen. It was beyond it, but it was a lot of luck and a lot of hard work that came together to make it happen.
Before we move to the main topic, I do want to ask you, because now that you mentioned that, was Margo the one who approached you originally about developing a show through Fifth Avenue, or had you already been doing it before, Margo? I always feel like it started with Hairspray.
Hairspray, the Fifth Avenue had some history of doing it in the past. They actually were part of the group that did Jekyll and Hyde before it went to Broadway, a dozen years before I got there. But yes, Hairspray was one of the first things. The way that came about is I got the job at the Fifth Avenue, and there was about 6 months of time before I actually went to Seattle. So everybody I saw in New York, including all the producers I knew, I would say, I'm going to Seattle. I think it'd be a great place to try out a show. And it actually was through Richard Frankel, who was part of the Hairspray group, who that idea stuck in his head. And when the Hairspray came up, I got a call. And then Margo, of course, was the one who made the final decision, and we became very tight. And the real reason we were so successful and are still successful is that Margo literally went back to New York and said, I'm never going to do another show out of town anywhere except the Fifth Avenue Theater. So that was like the stamp of approval that we couldn't ever have dreamed for. And that really started the ball more than rolling.
Well, Margo is a smart lady. We miss her.
Fantastic.
And the other thing that for people in the room who may not know, Margo was a creative producer. I mean, she's the one who decided, let's make a musical out of Hairspray. She got the material, got the rights, put the teams together.
Absolutely.
There are some producers who just raise money, and there's some producers who actually have the creative ideas and put it all together. Sue Frost is another one who's a creative producer, so, who you've also worked with. Those are the ones that I know. So I just want you to know that everybody in the room is talking about how incredible Broadway Nation is. Viewers out there, if you don't know Broadway Nation, his podcast, David's podcast, is called Broadway Nation. And if you have any interest in musicals at all and theater at all, you should be tuning in and listening to David.
We just posted the 97th episode. So I'm very, very happy with the way then the response has been phenomenal. And I think what prompted this conversation, or at least prompted me to be on this part of this conversation, is I did an episode a couple months ago about, I only talk about Broadway musicals on the show, but I thought, and people had been sort of pushing me to talk about Hollywood musicals as well. So with my frequent co-host, Albert Evans, we did an episode about Hollywood versus Broadway. What are the differences between movie musicals? And of course, it changes over the decades. If you look back in the early days, there's a lot of really easy to identify differences. And what are there things inherent about the mediums, and why are they often so different? And frankly, why are movie musicals often so disappointing?
That's getting right to it.
I have a lot of opinions.
I mean, one of my beefs is if you're gonna film a musical, why do you cut out all the songs? What is that about?
Well, if you look like what I call the Silver Age, the 20s and the 30s, those, when Hollywood would buy all those movie musicals, whether it was Good News or No No Nanette or the Girl Crazy, any of those, they were used to making movies. They knew how to make a movie. And still to this day, I feel like Hollywood is often afraid of the theatricality of a stage musical. On top of that, from a practical standpoint, they made more money if they replaced the songs, except for maybe one or two hits, because they had the writers under contract. So they would often replace, something like what's my Gay Divorce. Because of course it was called Gay Divorce on Broadway, and then Gay Divorce in the movie. This great Cole Porter score, they only keep one song, the big hit Night and Day, and all the other songs are written by other writers so they could own the copyrights to them and they could control them. It was economic for the most part in those days.
It was also just a not really a lack of understanding of the form itself, and not trusting that the form would be accepted by movie audiences. And I'm not sure whether they were right or not. We can't go back and rewrite history.
Right. That's absolutely right. They just made romantic comedies that they stuck songs into, as opposed to, and I think this is the real difference. A Broadway musical, in my opinion, when it achieves everything it can achieve, uses the songs as integral parts of telling the story. So if you actually take the songs out of a Broadway musical, the story won't be comprehensible for large sections of it, because you took out some of the plot, some of the character, you took things out. Most movie musicals, even the greatest movie musicals like Singing in the Rain, if you take the songs out, it doesn't affect the story at all. You don't want to see that movie because, of course, the musical numbers are the highlight of that, but it doesn't affect the story. They don't usually use the songs to tell the
Gene
story.
Hagen. That and Gene
Exactly.
Hagen. I mean, you can see it
Phenomenal.
just to hear her say, I have enough money, I can't stand it.
Yeah.
I love Gene Hagen. Let's move slowly forward, because I think there's still a lot of material to cover in the 30s and 40s, and when do you think it started changing? When do you think that Hollywood is a little bit more open to actually embracing the form itself? Because I think you're right that all those early musicals really did not much care about the form. Showboat, they kept everything. Why was Showboat the odd man out? How did that happen?
That's a good question, because it happens before the thing I think that really changed everything, but it may just be because Showboat was so integrated in many senses of the word, but in the classic, as Nancy would teach us if we were in her workshop, the integrated idea that everything's going to support the story, that was the show that was first trying to do that, or the first hit show that was trying to do that. But what I really think it has to do with Hammerstein, but with the Rodgers and Hammerstein shows, and it may be that was sort of forced on Hollywood, because what happened in between is the original cast album became a giant thing, starting with Oklahoma. And so then potential moviegoers all over the country knew what songs were in Oklahoma. They didn't know what songs were in Gay Divorce, except for maybe Night and Day. Now they knew the songs, they knew the story because the songs told the story, they knew the characters. So now if you were making a musical version of a Broadway show, there was much more pressure to provide the audience with the show they already had in their mind.
Well, thank goodness for that. Sense? Yeah, no, it does. I mean, Oklahoma, of course, is a turning point for a lot of things.
So many things.
Basically, it's the simple opening number. It's like, what? Where are all the Murray villagers? Why is this one band in a cornfield singing? But I think that the heart of what that was about was the fact that Rodgers and Hammerstein in particular, really respected the character and really respected the idea that you can learn a lot about the character from the songs. The songs really do support who that person really is on stage. So, we are introduced to Curly at the beginning of Oklahoma. I think we got better at writing songs and writing shows that really where the character songs really were true and deep and complex in terms of telling us about who the characters are. So what other turning points do you see in terms of this love-hate relationship between movies and theater? It really is a kind of a love-hate relationship. I mean, I think of Cabaret, for instance. What did that
I
movie?
think that's one of the great movie musicals of all time.
Yes, and it had nothing to do with the show.
Oh, I actually think it's sort of I'll talk about that in a minute. Let me just address your other point for a minute. I think the other, while we have this turning point and now the big Broadway musicals, starting with, I think, Rodgers and Hammerstein shows, and then, of course, moving into that period in the 60s when every year a big movie, Oliver, Funny Girl, Hello, Dolly, for better or worse, but still very faithful to the show, faithful to the material. All those shows started rolling out, and they were, My Fair Lady, trying as much as possible to capture every minute and every second of those Broadway shows. But meanwhile, Hollywood musicals were the ones that were made, original Hollywood musicals made in Hollywood, were continuing on with the same thing they had always done. They're basically doing jukebox musicals before we had that term, for the most part. Very few made in Hollywood musicals try to do what Broadway musicals do. Most of the made in Hollywood musicals are stories, romantic comedies, or biographies where they plug songs into it, mostly pre-existing songs. Very few, you can name like Meet Me in St. Louis to a certain extent, although it has songs plugged into it as well. Seven Brides for Seven Brothers. A few of them are trying to follow the Rodgers and Hammerstein model. But for the most part, Hollywood keeps making musicals very much like Broadway did back in the 20s and the 30s, but they keep doing it into the 40s and the 50s, and even to today.
Well, it's a two-way street. It's become a two-way street more and more. So there are properties. There are properties that have gone from movie musicals to stage musicals as well. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of those and what that?
Yeah. Do you want me to talk about Cabaret first? You want to go?
Okay, we can do Cabaret. I don't have my notes in any order.
That's right. No problem.
I just like
while you mentioned it, I can talk about.
Sure.
What's interesting about Cabaret is, I think, Cabaret is, in the way I teach a course on the history of the Broadway musical at the University of Washington, and we talk about that as being one of the first concept musicals, but it's sort of caught between a concept show and a book show and a traditional show. It's sort of half and half. There's like half the story is these conceptual numbers with in the cabaret with the MC and all that, and the other half is in some ways a very traditional Broadway score with the lovers, who in this case happen to be middle-aged lovers, but basically they're at the center of it.
As a touchstone for people in the room who may not know, because I think everybody in the room is pretty smart about musicals, a concept musical that is a concept musical would probably be Company. It's basically
a chorus line, company, yeah, anything that's sort of more about the idea than it is about the plot. It's the idea. Everything's going to revolve around a certain idea, but we're not necessarily concerned with telling the story. In fact, some of them are thought of as plotless musicals, which isn't really true. But
the other interesting thing about that is, as musical writers, a lot of us know that we start thinking about how do you justify the singing. I mean, we know that from Lehman Engel and others that basically you say that people sing when their emotion is too big for speech. But in other situations, like in Cabaret in Chicago, a concept is sort of becomes the ruling idea of the show. So in Cabaret, you're in a cabaret. And so the songs, a lot of them are what we call prop songs, because they are songs that are basically commenting on the action and being sung in the context of the cabaret itself. Likewise, Chicago, I guess Kander and Ebb loved concept musicals. Chicago basically puts everything into the framework of a vaudeville. So I think that does that clarify for some people, I hope, what concept is versus a book musical.
And I think,
was that okay?
yeah, we'll see if somebody can chime in a minute. But what happened between the stage show of Cabaret and the movie, which was in those years in between, concept musicals, we then had Company, we then had Follies, we then had a chorus line. We had, maybe not a chorus line yet. I have to look at the calendar for that. But the idea of the concept musical became clearer. And what Fosse's doing in the movie of Cabaret is emphasizing the concept that was there and de-emphasizing the traditional musical. So he took out all the traditional elements, the
book songs, basically.
The book songs, basically.
Yeah.
Took out the book songs and just focused on the conceptual. In a way, he's sort of like, I don't know if he thought of it this way, but I sort of viewed he's completing the concept with that movie. And in fact, Kander and Ebb, after the movie, and even Hal Prince, have taken things from that movie and made it more conceptual each time it's been done.
I mean, it's interesting as an audience member. I remember seeing Cabaret. I remember sitting actually in the second row with that mirror looking down at me, and you know that one of the opening concepts was that we're all part of this. We're all part of what's happening on stage, and there was something spectacular about the show. The show was wonderful. I mean, it was unforgettable. Then when I saw the movie, it was equally terrific, but it was not the same experience at all.
Yeah. But I think that was smart because the movie makers knew they couldn't replicate that experience on the movie screen, so they did something else.
Right. Chicago, the movie Chicago, that adheres a little bit more closely to. What would you say about the stage versus the screen version of Chicago?
I saw the original production of Chicago and the revival on Broadway, and love that show, and think the movie is very, very good. My only quarrel with the movie is I didn't think they needed the device to be quite so severe that every time there's a musical number, it's inside one of the characters' heads. And they sort of hit us over the head with that because Hollywood is always afraid of the theatricality of of a stage musical, even though there have been dozens of stage musicals, including most of the Rodgers and Hammerstein ones, including Oliver, and you can even argue My Fair Lady has its ups and downs, but most of those shows just have people sing when it's time for them to sing, and we completely accept it, but that terrifies movie makers for the most part.
I want to actually mention Oliver because you mentioned it. Since you did, my personal opinion is that the movie Carol Reed fixed the show. The show,
it's much
I think,
better
is
than the
just
show. Yeah.
terrible. Does anybody realize how terrible the show Oliver is?
I've produced it. I know what the challenges of it. The movie tells the story much, much better.
So that's an interesting.
But doesn't shy away from people standing in the street singing a song, and we just go with it because the movie makers, Carol Reed, had the conviction of this is what we're going to do. Whereas I felt like Rob Marshall, who did such a great job with Chicago, whether it was him or whether it was the producers, just felt we need an excuse for doing musical numbers. We need to have a device that says that it's not really a musical. It's not really, yeah.
Your teacher, Nancy Galladay, Nancy, who's in the room, who teaches the BMI librettist workshop, for those of you who don't know her, she comments when we were talking about Chicago, Jeff Marks remarked that once that everyone in Chicago was lying when they started to sing. I think that's pretty accurate. They're lying, whether they're consciously lying or unconsciously lying. But yes, I think all of the songs really are about some level of dishonesty. Interesting reversal of the standard musical trope that a character can't lie to you in a song. Yeah, I guess that really does break that rule.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting.
Yeah. What do you think of Tony Kushner's rewrite of West Side Story? Okay, should we jump to now, or do we want to fill in a little bit before we get to today?
Totally up to you. Where do you want to?
Let's get
to ask a question a little minute ago about something else. What was that? We skipped over? Now I can't remember. We went back to Cabaret instead of something, but
Well,
I'm sure it'll all
Larry
come out.
says something about the read a history of how very close Oklahoma came to being a huge flop. Everybody's saying what a great podcast you give. You give great podcasts. No, I don't.
You want to talk about West Side Story? We'll talk about West Side Story. Because I was just about to mention, I think the original movie of West Side Story, and this may be part of my example. I assign 10 different movies or videos to my students in the class, the big lecture class that I teach. And I will be assigning again the original movie of West Side Story, not the new movie of West Side Story. Because number one, my class is about the history of the Broadway musical. So that one, because it's much closer to the original content of the Broadway musical, and it features the original choreography, that is the one that I will present to my students as here's as close as we can get to you seeing. If I could take them to see a production of West Side Story, I would do that. But this is as close as we can get to seeing West Side Story on a stage in the way that the original creators intended it. I thought the new movie was pretty good. I liked it. I didn't love it. I didn't think it needed all that explanation. It made it literal in a way that the show is very expressive and it's not real. It's not supposed to be entirely a real situation with real people. And it's much more poetic than that. And I thought Tony Kushner explaining everything and giving everybody their backstory and doing all that stuff, for me, weighted it down, made it less interesting.
I have somewhat of a different opinion. I thought
a lot of different opinions on it.
Yeah, I know. I thought a lot of things that they did were very smart. I think the use of Rita Moreno in replacing the what's his name? She's the wife instead of the husband.
Doc. Yeah.
Doc, replacing Doc. I thought that was very, very moving and very effective.
I like that.
I thought it was dramatically very sound.
What I didn't think worked,
the dance in the gym didn't work for me. The magic didn't happen.
Yeah.
It kind of threw out a lot of the stage musical magic for gritty realism, and I missed some of it, to be honest with you. I thought that it was also very smart that they used "Cool" as a song to. It became a conflict song in a way that it hadn't been in the show. It was about daring them to use the knife, or they're fighting over the knife or something.
That was one of the the gun. That was one of the changes I liked
yeah.
the most about it, because if you're not going to recreate Jerome Robbins' choreography, which was what the movie was decided not to do, which was, I think, the smart thing for a remake to do, then there's no reason for "Cool" if you're not doing that number. You're just going to have a pale imitation of the original. So that to repurpose that song, I thought was really smart, and I like that very much.
Yeah, I agree with that. All in all, it was a bumpy road for me.
I want to say one thing about Rita Moreno, who I thought was great. What I didn't think worked so well was her singing "There's a Place for Us," because it actually was very moving and affecting, but it was about the wrong thing for me. It was about, the nostalgia of Rita Moreno, who was in the original movie, now singing "There's a Place for Us." And it took me out of the story entirely to make it nostalgia about who she was and why she's in this movie as an actress.
I wept.
Good.
I wept.
Good.
I was waterworks from that. I thought I loved her in it. And no, I understand what you're saying. I mean, I loved the way they did somewhere in the remake. I missed the impact of it when it was really sung by these kids who were these hopeless kids who were dealing with violence and death and had to find a way of moving on.
And of course, even in the original movie, they didn't do it the way it was done on Broadway. And Broadway, it's sung by an offstage singer while they do a ballet. So they turned it into a duet for the lovers in the original movie, because they weren't going to do that 10-minute ballet.
So
It's all every time you turn it into a movie, you have to make adjustments. You have to change things. You can't just put what was on the stage in the movie, but the best movies find a way to meld it all together.
So the takeaway, I think, is to understand the medium that you're working in. I've been going through this for 2.5 years, transitioning into Zoom and trying to, I see people using virtual in brilliant ways, and I see people using virtual in awkward, clumsy ways. And it's the same thing. If you're going to think in terms of film, you really have to understand the medium and have to know what it's capable of doing. And it can do things that you can't do on stage. But on the other hand, there's something about stage magic that is just, you can't repeat it in a movie. There's something that happens in a live performance that I don't know how to explain it. I really don't.
That's why
I think it might go back to the Greeks. I think it might go back to theater as being a communal experience and being a religious experience. You're part of a community when you're watching a show.
That's exactly what I was going to say. That's why we're still sitting there doing the exact same thing people did 2,000, 3,000, probably 5,000 years ago, in the pretty much the same way. Maybe now there's microphones and there's some electronics and there's some tech involved with it, but basically you're sitting in a seat with some live person in front of you telling a story. And that is one of the few things we do in daily life that's exactly the way every generation before us has done it.
Well, we can't really do a comprehensive survey of movie musicals from 1920 to 2023, but we're hitting some of the high spots, I think. So, Owen, if there are any things in the chat that I'm missing that we might want to address, please let us know.
Yeah,
sure. We have a question from Maureen. What do you think of the musical The Greatest Showman, and the way they cover a lot of silent action and scenes during the song?
You mean with a lot of cutaways to other things happening, basically? Is that, I don't remember. I saw the movie, but I'm not exactly sure I know what is being referred to. There's a lot of montage sequences in there, as I remember, which is a great movie technique that you can do, but it's sort of like what often dance can do in a stage show as well.
I remember the movie didn't work for me, but I don't remember exactly why. Anybody else have anything that they want to add about The Greatest Showman? I didn't find that people were singing at the right moments. I just like, where did that song come from? It was kind of the thing that I went through. And I don't think they used the songs well in terms of storytelling, but somebody please disagree with me. Anybody want to disagree with me? No? No one was.
Well, I think that there's something super interesting about the use of montage, just because that is something that can only be done in a movie. You don't have, I mean, you can do a montage through a ballet or something like that, and you can express, but you can't, the length of time and location, you can't achieve that on the stage nearly as well. So I at least commend it for, trying something with the form of film that you can't do on stage, which I think is something that it's a misstep for a lot of movie musicals, is that they don't do enough they either are trying to film it almost exactly like it is a staged thing, or they're trying to film it exactly like a movie, unless you strike that balance, I think either end of the spectrum is going to be
so I agree with you that it was cinematic. It was successful cinematically. I think that the conversation here is whether it was successful as a musical.
I'll just to chime in on that. I think when you're making a movie, you should make a movie, and a lot of times taking a movie musical and putting it on the stage doesn't work, because smart people made a movie, and you can go way back to like Gigi or Meet Me in St. Louis, two musicals that do not work on stage, because even though they were stage people who wrote those shows, they wrote them as a movie, and they're meant for actors in close-up. The power of what they wrote was with the idea that this was going to land on a movie screen with movie stars in close-ups. When you then put them on the stage, which people have tried to do, even Singing in the Rain doesn't work on the stage for a lot of the same reasons, because smart people wrote a movie and now you're moving it to a different medium, and it's very hard to make then even those songs work in a stage format.
Well, basically, the big challenge in Singing in the Rain on stage is convincing us that that it's really about movies, because we're watching it on stage. I mean, I always thought, what if you adapted it and made the same, found a way of telling a similar story, but from the point of view of a stage, of the development of in stage musicals. So yeah, there's all sorts of conversations and all sorts of in between areas for a lot of this.
Yeah, and somebody saying, yes, movies is primarily a visual form and theater is primarily an oral form. Even with all the great dancing and singing and sets and costumes, we mostly listen in the theater. And
actually the examples of plays, of musicals that aspire to be cinematic, or things like, or a lot of the Cameron Mackintosh musicals, they aspire to be big and impressive and breathtaking, with chandeliers falling and helicopters flying and, you know, all that sort of stuff. And that is, when it's done well, yeah, I mean, then cinematic devices on stage, or the feeling of cinema on stage, can actually be very entertaining and very exciting. But again, to go back to the opening premise that I started with, I think what we want to do is, as writers, because a lot of us are writers, is recognize the differences between the two media and to try to make sure that we're understanding the medium that we're writing for. So, which is what you also said.
And if you have to make the jump, then figure out how to make the jump, because it can be done successfully in both directions. It's just not, it won't be easy and evident because they are so different.
Okay, I'm going to challenge you on this one. What is the most successful movie musical that was translated to stage? Because I don't think Seven Brides for Seven Brothers necessarily was as successful. I don't think
from movies to stage is what you're saying. Yeah, started as a movie musical, yeah, and then was turned into a stage musical. That's a hard one. I think that's harder to do for some reasons. Anybody might be the one that had the most turned into the biggest hits. But it
also became much more musicalized than it was.
They made it much more of a musical than it was originally. That's the one coming off the top of my mind. I mean, Lion King, if you look at the Disney ones, of course, Lion King is the most successful entertainment property of all time in terms of how much money it's made.
And look at how, that's a great example of how to rethink something in stage terms. Julie Taymor, her design and her concept for Lion King is just breathtaking. And it's basically saying, how do we take a movie and make it magical on stage? And she found the way of doing it. A lot of,
how do we take an animated movie was the real
animated, yes.
Yeah. And Aladdin has done that very successfully as well.
Which I haven't seen. I keep wanting to see Aladdin.
It's a very entertaining show.
I was mixed about Beauty and the Beast on stage, but
it was kind of schlocky in but even Tom will tell you that was a great first attempt for Disney, and it was a big hit and people liked it, but it was a little like a theme park show, and they've worked very hard not to do that again, to not have shows be like that.
Owen, are you keeping an eye on the chat? Because I think people are making comments.
Oh, we have so much conversation and so many questions. We have a lot of just let's talk about, but I think I'd like to start with, where is it?
I'm giving him such power.
Andrea makes a great point about the penchant for movie musicals to attempt to turn movie stars into musical theater stars that perhaps do not have that pedigree. She uses La La Land for an example of that. But
oh hell, we could just say that one name, Elizabeth Taylor. It's like Little Night Music with Elizabeth Taylor was just.
I mean, you're absolutely. I mean, Hollywood has always done that. It's always because movies are about movie stars. Movies are about movie stars in a close-up. That's the most important thing about a movie. And that's what Hollywood is going to deliver. And they're going to try then to make the best musical they can, but they're going to always err toward the stars. People get outraged. Why didn't the Broadway stars get to go recreate their roles on Broadway? Because they're not movie stars.
I'm going to actually pose the question to you and also to Nancy. So Nancy, turn on your mic if you have an answer to this. What went wrong with A Little Night Music in the movie? What went so terribly wrong?
Well, for one thing, they cut a lot of the score, I'm told. I'm not a musician, but I'm told that they just chopped the hell out of it. So that would throw the rhythm of the piece off.
David, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, that movie
and wasn't it was
flat.
directed by Prince.
By Hal Prince, but I think that's part of the problem, who's not primarily a film director. And when, in that case, I think they were trying maybe too hard to recreate the Broadway show. And they, the cast is all great, but nobody's particularly good in that movie, even the stage stars. It all just falls flat because they haven't reinvented it as a movie. They've sort of just stayed too faithful to the show. And I can't really answer the question of what they should have done. How would they have changed that? Because there are similar movies. Gigi's a wonderful movie, and you think it has a very similar tone and feel to that, but somehow that movie works, and this movie just did not.
And in a funny way, they tried to make it intimate, and Into the Woods. They could have gone for the spectacle, and they didn't for whatever reason.
Yeah. Somebody mentioned the difference then between a video capture, which I love. I wish every Broadway show had a high quality video capture, like the Sweeney Todd video capture, the Into the Woods video capture. That just should be written into the budget of the Broadway show, as far as I'm concerned, because then that's very different than a movie musical. That's not a movie. That is a document of the stage show, hopefully done really well to give you as close a feeling as you can to sitting in a theater, but it's on stage, it's actors in a proscenium doing the show. And I love those, but they're like the Into the Woods video capture is fantastic, but I also like the movie of Into the Woods very much.
I like that too.
They're completely different. I mean, they're completely different experiences.
And also, to go back to casting the Broadway stars in movies, we did have that happen a couple times. Rex Harrison did My Fair Lady, and Robert Preston did Music Man. And both of them are really, I think they're terrific movies.
But they tried to cast everybody else except Robert Preston. They tried to cast Gene Kelly. They tried to cast Cary Grant as
well, aren't we lucky that they got
instead of Rex Harrison? But yeah, that was so great, and they both delivered. I actually think Music Man is among the most successful Broadway to film transfers there are, and they make it completely satisfying as a movie, and they completely capture the Broadway experience.
I agree with you. I think the spirit of the movie of the show is really in that movie. I miss the songs that they cut. I mean, I miss My White Night. Am I the only person that misses My White Night?
I can't join you on that one. I like the new song much better. Even in the theater, My White Night always puts me to sleep. So yeah.
No, I just saw it.
That's heresy to say.
I saw it recently with Sutton, and I loved the revival of it. I love that. I love that show all the time. Anytime I see it, it's great. So I think I took us away from we were going forward with something else. Owen, we're going to address something else.
I think we kind of covered. Tracy would like to know if you feel that the Les Mis movie was successful. It was shot in a very specific way, and so I guess any opinions on that?
I did not think the idea of having everybody sing live was a good idea. I didn't think it worked. I thought it made everybody sound bad. Even the people who could sing didn't sound particularly good that way. And it's not, I don't know what they were trying to accomplish, because everybody in a movie musical is lip syncing because everybody pre-records, and then they, even if it's your own voice, you're lip syncing. Barbara Streisand is lip syncing to her own voice through most of Funny Girl. She does sing My Man live at the end of that movie. And sometimes maybe that does give you some power and give you something, but to take those non-singers and then make them sing live on set, I thought was, number one, cruel to them and didn't work for me.
Oh boy. About Les Mis, there is no musical that is more cinematic on stage than Les Mis. It's basically, it's all about the turntable. So it's a property that was originally 7 different films. So putting it on stage, making it a musical, and then bringing it back to the film doesn't seem like that big of a leap to me at all. And I thought that they did it. I thought they did a reasonable job of it in the movie. I didn't love it, but I liked it.
I think the filmmaking part of it was actually very well done, and the storytelling was well done. To me, it was the music element of it that I thought did a disservice to the show.
So to Nancy Galladay, yes, we can talk about Moulin Rouge. What do you want to talk about?
Just what a bad idea I think it was to put it on stage.
Well, a lot of people out there are liking it. I actually haven't seen it, so I can't
A lot
really.
of people are liking it, and it's kind of a mystery to me. I guess it's a question of the audience going to the theater and getting something that's exactly what they expect. I'm not sure why that's gratifying, but it seems to have been working for them. But to me, it was such a disappointment.
Well, am I allowed to say that I didn't really like the movie? So.
Well, the movie was all about spectacle. You know,
Yeah.
it's all about spectacle, and you cannot stage that kind of party scene live. You just can't do it. People would die.
Oh, we'd have another rewrite of a revisit of Spider-Man. There's another example of trying to put something movie magic on stage and having really terrible consequences on that.
I agree with you, Nancy. I did not enjoy the stage production of Moulin Rouge, and it's like most other jukebox musicals, with a few exceptions. It seems to be only about giving people something that they're already familiar with, and the sort of a nostalgic, in the wrong kind of way for me, experience. But it's a big hit.
May I say that I enjoyed the movie version of Mamma Mia every bit as much as I enjoyed the stage version?
How do we interpret that?
Not at all.
See, I'm an exception there. And those songs mean nothing to me. I missed those songs entirely for some reason, the ABBA songs. I remember the first time I saw the stage show, I thought I'd never heard any of these songs before except for one. But I thought they did something really hard to do, which is create a story that we actually get involved with and care about those characters with, and still use those songs. And that's why that and Jersey Boys are the 2 big hits. Beautiful also, and I haven't seen the Michael Jackson one, but apparently they're achieving the storytelling that you need to make those shows work. Because the songs won't do it on their own. I do want to. We're getting off topic, though.
I do want to shout out for Jersey Boys. I thought Jersey Boys was the smartest jukebox musical I'd ever seen. I thought it really told the story well and used the songs well.
And Hollywood's been doing that formula for years, from Yankee Doodle Dandy to every bio musical, all the way up through, through to today. They tell a biographical story and they use all the songs associated with that person. And Broadway never did that until the Jersey Boys, basically.
So, Owen, we're about 34 questions behind. So can you start catching us up?
Yeah, let's see. Someone wanted to talk about Tootsie.
It wasn't a
Right.
musical to begin with, is the difference there from what we've been talking about.
Yeah, it's a different conversation if you talk about musicalizing movies, because I mean, you can start with Hairspray and just go through the entire repertoire of things that did work and things that didn't. Catch Me If You Can didn't work.
Yeah,
Tootsie kind of worked. I didn't hate it. I couldn't follow the story in 9 to 5 as a musical. It's like, what's going on?
I think for this conversation, why don't we stick to musical movies that were already musicals before they came to the stage?
And Laurie Elliskew, long time ago, asked whether Stop the World is a concept musical, and the answer is yes.
Absolutely.
And so is Roar the Grease Man Smelled the Crowd.
And so is Six, currently on Broadway.
Oh yeah, that's a concept musical. Six is an absolute example of a concept musical. It's not a narrative. I mean, I think that once your narrative is really broken, and once your narrative really isn't the driving force behind the show, you're entering into the area of concept musical. The idea, like you said earlier, David, the idea is driving the show, not necessarily the story.
Yeah, I mean, Six is such a great example to explain to people, because it's the whole idea there is, let's put all 6 wives of Henry VIII on stage all at the same time, talking to each other, and not have Henry be part of it. They get to tell their side of the story. That's the and then there's heavy concept on top that now we'll make each one of them. This is very much like Chicago. Each one of them is going to be styled after a famous performer, a famous singing star, which is that, I don't know whether they even knew about Chicago when they wrote it, but that's ideas lifted or grafted on from Chicago, which every song in that show was either Sophie Tucker, or every song was in the style of a famous vaudevillian.
So keep going, Owen. I'm trying to catch up as well.
Yeah, I think we're mostly caught up. We have a question from Rob Hoffman. Re La La Land, what will it take to work on stage?
More songs, because I think it only had 6 or 8 songs. I don't remember. Not very. And
okay,
in my mind,
how are you going to do the opening number on stage?
You're gonna have to reconceive it. You have to do something else. And that was my favorite part of the movie, was the opening number. But that would be very hard, and maybe they'll figure out a way. Never say never, but that will be a big challenge to put on a stage and make work, and then not have it just be sort of a faint memory of what was in the movie.
Okay, you answered the capture question.
Yeah, I think we're all caught up right now.
Are we? God, there's so many things in here.
RK Green is asking, what about all the big movie companies starting divisions to develop their musical movies for Broadway? Has it worked?
The reason they are doing it, they started doing it, it was first Disney having success, and then Wicked, which was owned by Universal. Those two things together made all the other movie companies go, because they're interested in money. How do we make money? And how do we make more money on properties we already own? And when Lion King became, and even before this, but it is now the highest grossing entertainment property of all time, live or film. And that's just the stage musical of Lion King, has grossed more money than all the Star Wars films put together, grossed more money than any other entertainment property in the history of the world. A stage show, a stage musical. That got their attention. So now they want to figure out how they can do it too, which is why you ended up with Spider-Man on Broadway. Because it was, again, how can we take something we already own and turn it into, and make more money off of it? Sometimes they hire artists who just find the right way to approach that material and make art out of it, in spite of it coming from a commercial place to begin with. But most of the time they don't. Most of the time it just comes off as movie that's now been turned into a musical, and you can just sort of feel the cynicism behind it. But that's not always the case. Sometimes it's spectacular. There's no, it just, if the right group of talented artists get their hands on it and get given, like Julie Taymor was able to do, although I think there's some serious problems with the craftsmanship of that show, but Julie Taymor's work is so dazzling that we don't worry about it.
And to answer, I mean, to respond to what you had said about Julie Andrews not being in My Fair Lady, yeah, it's a big shame. I will also say that Audrey Hepburn did a very good job in that role. I mean, the movie is one of the best movie musicals in my opinion ever made. It's gorgeous, and the story is there. It's clear. The songs are, I think they're all there. I don't think they left anything out. I'm not sure. And right. Julie had her revenge, because I think that was the same year that she was cast as Mary Poppins.
That's correct.
So it all worked out. It all worked out. Older and newer versions on Broadway of Sunday in the Park. That's a kind of a different conversation. So guys, if there are any more. Oh, Nancy, you said the Jersey Boys movie is fun too. I don't think I saw the movie. David, should I see the movie version of Dreamgirls? There's an interesting one.
Happy to talk about it. I actually have not. I only have not seen the Jersey Boys movie all the way through. I think I've only seen cut parts of it on TV. It's something I do want to watch at some point, because I did love that show. Dreamgirls is another show which is really interesting, really instructive in terms of what we're talking about today, because they also were afraid. I felt like the filmmakers were a little bit afraid of the theatricality of it. So they cut out a lot of the, I'll say recitative, which is, I don't really mean that because it's done much better than opera recitative, but the parts of the score which are dialogue put to music. And through the whole first half of the movie, almost all that's been cut out, and is very disappointing to me. Then they get to the scene before, and I'm telling you, I'm not going, and they can't take that out because, number one, it's the best part of the whole show, and it leads into that song. And all of a sudden, for the first time, characters are singing their dialogue, and it sort of go, why are they doing this now when we didn't do it before? And I think it sort of epitomizes that challenge that movie makers often have, is how are we going to how we're going to have characters sing their dialogue, and how will they're just worried audiences won't accept it. It's why when you see the movie, the trailer for any movie musical, even the West Side Story movie, you almost never see anybody singing in it. Right. They almost have no music in it, because they don't want the audience to know it's going to be a musical, because they're so terrified that that will turn off people.
To address what you're just saying, also, just from dramaturgical point of view, in our musical workshop, we teach the fact that your opening number needs to set the rules of storytelling. So if in the stage version of Dreamgirls, they set the rules of the storytelling in the opening number. So right. we expect them to sing their lines. Somebody who was directing or behind the Dreamgirls movie didn't understand that, and it's a very important
they didn't
rule.
Understand. They were afraid of it.
They were afraid of it, but it's just like, you can't do that. You can't set up a framework for your storytelling and then suddenly go off in a whole different direction halfway through.
Even so, that movie is very enjoyable and kind of works. It has I think it's a pretty good movie, but it would be fantastic if they had, in my opinion, been more faithful, or been even invented some other way to bring that to the stage.
I think they took a good film approach to step into the dark side. That something you didn't see that on stage quite that way, and I think they used the film medium well in that scene, and probably others if I thought about it hard enough.
Yeah, absolutely.
A lot of questions about SpongeBob. Nothing specific, but just how do you feel about SpongeBob? What do you think about SpongeBob opening in Chicago, and also just SpongeBob?
I didn't get it. I was completely, it meant nothing to me on the stage version of it. So I'm the wrong person to have an opinion about, because I actually had hardly ever seen the cartoon to begin with. But again, not really. I guess they are songs in the cartoon, but not really a musical being brought to the stage. You're just sort of a musical based on those characters. It's more like Little Abner or than a movie musical that then becomes a stage musical.
RK, I can't find your question before. You said something about the divisions of studios that are now dedicated to developing musicals. I know it's in here somewhere. I was going to bring that up.
Yeah, we kind of talked about that.
You did? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, because I couldn't find the question again.
Tracy wants to know, David, what is your favorite movie musical and why do you think it's successful?
You know, it's just like asking anybody what's your favorite Broadway musical. It changes daily, but I would say in the top, 10 of movie musicals for me, always The Music Man is always there. Cabaret is actually always there. Why are they successful? I think because they have the confidence behind the filmmaking of them. They just decided this is what they figured it out, and they weren't afraid to go for it. And they're very different because the Music Man is actually having characters sing their dialogue, is having the music, the musical numbers tell the story as if it's part of the realism of telling the story. And Cabaret is deciding not to do any of that. They're only having characters sing when that would be appropriate inside the nightclub or in the beer garden. So they took very different approaches to that. If you're talking about made for Hollywood musicals, I love The Bandwagon. I love Singing in the Rain. I love all those MGM, or many of those big MGM period musicals. But again, those are like star delivery systems. The reason those are so great is because they had the greatest musical stars ever, who happened to be movie stars, who were had movie magnetism on top of being, Fred Astaire, Gene Kelly, Judy Garland, who had all of that, and they made movies to showcase those stars, very similar to what they did on Broadway back in the 20s and the 30s, where every show was basically a star vehicle. You started with, we got Ethel Merman and Burt Lahr and Jimmy Durante, now make a show for them. And in some ways, that's the way the Hollywood...
I know. Red Hot and Blue.
Exactly, or make 3 shows for them. But that's what they're doing in Hollywood too. It's like, we want to make a movie for Gene Kelly. Comden and Green write a movie for Gene Kelly to star in, and that's where Singing in the Rain comes from. So they come from this showcasing stars, which thank God, because they were so phenomenal. But in a way that sort of makes them a different animal than an integrated modern, and by I say modern, post Rodgers and Hammerstein, and including all the developments that came after Rodgers and Hammerstein with the concept musical and all that kind of stuff. Let's write a show about something, and then we'll put people in it. So they're sort of coming from different standpoints. Both of them can be thrilling.
So David, I think it would be an interesting addition to my feedback panel for our musical workshop. I'm going to talk to you about that later.
Cool. Happy to do it.
I think that would be great. I
have opinions. You can tell that.
Your opinions aren't that hard to take. I mean, you have information and knowledge. Your opinions, yeah, sure. We all have opinions, but you know a lot. And Nancy Galladay, who is also part of the feedback panel, is saying, "I second that emotion, Bob." So Nancy, we're gonna bring David into our workshop. I want to thank you, David. I want to thank everybody in the room for being active and being engaged in the conversation. Back 2.5 years ago, did I mention this is the 143rd consecutive week that I'm doing this?
Wow.
143rd consecutive week. So back 2.5 years ago, I didn't know exactly how this was all going to work, and we really do want everybody to be engaged. We really want you to be using the chat. We really want you to be talking to us. And that's part of why I do this. I want to get you guys involved and engaged. So thank you all for being a great community. David, you heard the introductions at the beginning, so you know a lot of these people are doing some amazing stuff.
Great to meet everybody.
I'm going to go and just do a little couple final words. I'll be right back. So those of you out there in YouTube land and in podcast land, thank you for being with us. Again, if you want to join us in the room and be able to ask your questions and be part of the conversation, email me at trunltd@aol.com. Very simple. We'd love to have you. We're doing this every Friday at 5 o'clock, and I've got a whole schedule that I'm putting together right now. So I can't announce a lot officially yet, but in a couple of days, I'll probably be able to announce the next 4 or 5 meetings that we're going to be doing. We do this for free. It's community service. It started out as a thing for COVID to get us through, and so of course it was always free. It was always pay what you can. So it still is free. It's still pay what you can. And gosh, if anybody can support us with a donation, we can always use the money. We have bills to pay, and somebody put the complicated URL, and Jay put the complicated URL. If you actually use TRU Donate, trudonate.com, it'll actually redirect to the link that Jay put in there. But for those of you out there who don't see the chat, trudonate.com, trudonate.com. Thank you for being with us, and hope you'll join us in the future. That's it.